Welcome to the road to growth, success of an entrepreneur.
We've raised the bar.
Learn firsthand from successful business owners and create your own path to success.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
It's time to hit the road to growth with team lead of the Enriquez Group, Realtor Vinny.
Hi, you Road to Growth listeners. Today we have Terry, and we're on a little roll right now. We've had a lot of coaches recently. I think the last 3 interviews we've done, a podcast, it's been coaches. So, and this is a question I've been asking more and more frequently. What separates you from other coaches?
Well, what separates me from other coaches is that I did the job that many of the people that I coach now do. So I worked in the corporate world for 30 years. I've been through many, many challenges that people that I work with are facing. And so not only can I help them find their truth, but a lot of times I can, advise them on things that I've seen or give them some context for how things really work in the corporate world.
Has it changed over time? I mean, when you got into the corporate world, it seems like, and maybe it's just me from the outside looking in, before I got on the podcast, started doing that, it seemed like it was more mentors than coaches, or if there was coaches out there, there was only a select few of a couple of companies and things like that. And it seems like there's more opportunities to find the right fit because there are more coaches out there.
I think there are a lot more coaches out there. The International Coach Federation, I think, was founded in the 90s. I got my start in the 80s, and I, at one point in the early 2000s, hired a coach. And I remember, running up against this challenge at work that I really didn't know what to do about. And I remember kind of scratching my head and saying, I think there's something out there called like a career coach or something. And this was actually before Google. So I went out to Yahoo and I searched and I found somebody that did coaching in my town, and she helped me tremendously. But yeah, it's definitely a growing industry. You're seeing a lot more people doing it. And in the past, people would be like, what do you coach? Soccer?
And we'll get into your journey. I know you've also written a book, and it's about the transition of kind of getting out of, I guess, corporate world and starting your own business. Is that kind of like the gist of it?
No, it's actually about the book's called Winning the Game of Work, and it's really about how to be successful in a corporate environment. Because I learned a lot of lessons along the way that many of them I had to learn the hard way by, falling on my face, school of hard knocks, that kind of thing. And part of my motivation for being a coach is to help other people have a smoother journey to success, whatever that means for them in their career. And writing the book was about sharing a lot of the lessons that I learned. And also I interviewed a lot of people and kind of giving a view into what it takes to move up within your career.
For yourself, did you always know you wanted to be in the corporate world? Kind of walk us through your journey.
Well, I grew up in more of a blue collar family. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I knew that I wanted to, parlay. I was good at school. I wanted to parlay my intelligence and work ethic into being able to make a lot of money. And my, I thought, well, the best way to do that is to be successful in a business. At that time, I didn't have any great idea to be an entrepreneur or anything like that. So I thought I'd like to get into the workplace and just rise within that. Initially, my ambition was to be a chief marketing officer. And I never did get to the top position, but I did get to the top position, within a very large organization for like a division. And so, it worked for me. I was successful within that environment, and it was comfortable. It made it comfortable for my family. But as time went on, I just realized that I felt like the price that I was paying for that success on many fronts was dissatisfying. I wanted to find something that was a little more aligned with my natural, strengths and desires of how I wanted to use my talents.
What, when you say basically what you're paying, was it time? Was it, what does that mean to you?
What it meant to me was that I actually talk about this a lot, that I feel like when you can spend maybe about 70% of your time at work working on things that you get satisfaction out of, you can tolerate maybe that other 30% where you have to deal with the BS and the bureaucracy and the politics and all that kind of thing. And in the last role that I was in, I'd say like probably the last 2 or 3 years, I felt like that balance was shifting, that I was spending less and less of my time and energy on things that I got enjoyment out of, that I felt like, I could really use my talents and strengths and creativity to feel good about what I was doing. And I was spending a lot more time, putting energy into, just like the permission to do my job, right? Like just dealing with bureaucracy and that kind of thing. And I felt like there was like sort of a lack of alignment between what I was naturally good at and what I really like to do, and the ability or the opportunities that I had within that job to do it. So it was just sort of, maybe in some ways we were growing apart, if you will, to the point where I had to divorce my job.
Do you think there is something your company could have done to keep you there and to be a lifer there?
Maybe, and it's funny because there were some things that I had really been advocating for a long time about the way that I was head of marketing for one of the businesses, and I had been talking for a long time about the fact that I felt like the way that they had the marketing department structured was inefficient, and that I kept kind of running into these brick walls all around me. And I really thought that a lot of it was because of the way it was structured. And I brought it up numerous times over the course of a couple of years. And of course, about 6 months after I left, they made the organizational change that I had been recommending. But I also am sort of, somewhat a believer in things happen for a reason, right? And in some ways, maybe it was good that they didn't make that change until after I left, because I like the road that I'm on now. And it's scary to leave. I had worked for that company for 12 years. It's scary to leave the devil,
Well, and how was that transition like? So you said you were working there, that you're getting frustrated. And I know you had a coach too, right? You were at least talking to someone previously.
Well, I actually wasn't working with a coach at that time.
Okay.
I had hired coaches. I'd probably hired a coach maybe about 15 years before that. And then I had worked with somebody maybe a couple of years before I ended up leaving. And actually part of the motivation for working with a coach, in that more recently, was I just didn't quite feel like there was good alignment, and not sure that coach helped me in the moment, but I think it was just all part of the process to lead me to where I finally decided to leave that organization.
So you reading through the line, so it seems like that coach was kind of almost, they couldn't help you be happy with the corporation that you're at, and so you kind of self-realized that you had to find something else. That kind of yeah, I think so. I mean, it's funny too, because like when you work for so long in corporate, there's different seasons, and I definitely had times in the 30 years I was working in corporate where I would say, and I'd worked for one company for close to 10 years and then that last company for 12 years. And, when you work for a company for such a long time, there are times when you're kind of like, like, do I like what I'm doing? Is this the right place for me? Or, maybe you're going through a really stressful time. I've worked in companies where they've had multiple mergers and restructurings and all kinds of stuff where it's not comfortable and you just question yourself. But then you round a corner and you're like, oh, look at this great project I'm doing. Or maybe you move into a new position and all of a sudden you fall back in love with what you're doing, right? And sometimes it's hard to know whether, am I just at a dip in the road and I can't see, bright skies ahead? Or is this just, not a good fit anymore? And it took me a while, the funny thing about that last role that I had at the last company was that
the job I was in was not one that I wanted. And my boss came to me and she said, I really want you to take this job. And I said, I really don't want that job. And she's like, I really want you to have this job. And, sometimes you just have to say, okay, I'm going to give it the old, college try. And I did. And for a number of reasons, part of what I talked about earlier, that it wasn't where that sat in the organization wasn't structured properly, which just caused a lot of sort of internal issues that, instead of me focusing on doing great marketing, I was having to go out and negotiate and, try to get resources and, just there was an alignment with other people in the organization that I could work more closely with. So anyway, I kind of had a sense it wasn't going to be a good fit, and it wasn't.
So once you're realizing it's not a good fit, how do you come to the realization that you wanted to be a coach?
Well, I was I was interviewing at other companies, and I actually had some interviews for some good, actually next step up marketing roles at other organizations. And, part of me would get excited about like, oh, that could be, I'd have like even more influence in the organization. It's more money, a higher title, all this kind of stuff. I'd get excited. But then there was like always a little bit of a knot in my stomach. Like, I think part of me knew that just wasn't my journey anymore. Marketing just wasn't my journey anymore. And I was doing a lot of networking, and I met somebody who had been a PR professional, and she had made the transition into coaching. And so much about her story was really similar to mine. Really had loved her career, but kind of got burnt out and found this coaching training program, and she really loved what she was doing. And so that made me think like, okay, I know what coaching's about because I've worked with coaches. And I also had always done a lot of coaching and mentoring as a marketing leader. I mean, to me, it just made sense. And I also recognized that there were a lot of my peers that were not investing as much in their direct reports, right? Like they were just always managing up and not necessarily, actively managing the people under them and working on developing them. And it paid a lot of dividends for me. Like I always had really good employee engagement scores. My teams were really high performing. I felt good about that investment. And I also got feedback from people that I was good at it. So, and I loved it. So, to me, I guess when I met that woman who had made the transition, I thought, little light bulb went off. And I thought, you know what, I think this, and also as an executive coach, you can make good money doing it, right? Because you can serve as a catalyst for business, right? To help them unlock the potential that a lot of times is trapped in teams or in leaders or in, good employees, right? Because, if there's conflict, if there's friction within organizations, that means that energy is going towards that, or it's being wasted there, rather than when you can help people have, more effective communications, or help them learn to delegate or build systems to take the weight off of the shoulders of somebody that really needs to be focused on more strategic initiatives. And then the business is going to see a positive impact, in terms of being able to have more sales calls, to close more business, to identify those, cost saving opportunities, whatever it is, just to become more profitable.
Well, going back to yours and your journey and your transition, so you get the idea, talking to this person about the idea of being a coach.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, being a coach, I'm assuming you started out with commission based. There's no kind of structure of getting paid, anything like that, correct?
Yeah, and I went through a training program which was 6 months long. It was a combination of in-person and online training, and as part of that, we had to start coaching people for free, right? And so that was going from like practicing in the course to, reaching out to people to say, hey, I'm looking for guinea pigs to, do you have any, issues or challenges that you're facing that you could use somebody to help you with? So that's how I started. And then, the funny thing was my first paid client was actually an investment banker, and I had done marketing for investment banking, so I understood the business. And a friend that I had worked with, he knew this guy, and he knew this guy was facing some challenges, both from a professional and personal standpoint. And he told this guy about me, and we ended up meeting, and he was my first client.
How was that? That first prospecting session, that first meeting with them, trying to sell them on the idea of being your client?
Well, it's not really a lot of, selling. It's really a lot of asking a lot of questions to get an understanding of what the issues are. And, it's funny because I did not really realize for a long time how much coaching had in common with what I did as a marketer. Especially when I was leading marketing, my job was to understand the problems or issues or challenges that the businesses that I did marketing for had. So I was meeting with senior executives and, heads of sales to understand, okay, what are the challenges that you're facing, right? Like, I want to really understand that at a deep level. And then I would, go back with my team, and we would formulate strategies on how to address those issues. And that's the same thing that we do in coaching, right? Like, you have to understand what's the issue here. And also, I think being a creative person, understanding, starting to envision, like, okay, well, what might have to be different to get a different result? And I mean, the beauty of coaching is that I'm dealing with the expert, which is that person, right? They're an expert on themselves. And a lot of times they're so close to whatever their issue is that they don't see that there are any options. And my job is really to help them step back, or to hold a mirror up to them so that they can really see themselves in the context of what's going on around them. And, together we start to sort of co-create what the strategy might be to get past this obstacle. And, I use this analogy sometimes that, somebody, like, they're on their path, they're walking along doing their thing, and they run into this big boulder, right? And they'll just keep, like, stepping back and trying to push the boulder out of the way. And they expend a lot of energy doing that. And what I try to help them do is say, let's step back even more, and let's look at the big picture here, because, like, maybe, like, over to the right, there's a ladder that you can climb up over the boulder, or over to the left, there's actually a path that they can take around it. So, my job is to help them, envision what's something different that you can do to get a different result, or to get past what this issue is. And, I think I've got the advantage of, first of all, having seen a lot of stuff, having, worked in these big complex organizations, and having seen the patterns of, just human behavior. And then also, when you coach a lot of different people, I see a lot of similar patterns in high achieving people. A lot of times they've gotten to where they are because they've been strong individual contributors. And sometimes it can be really difficult when people move from an individual contributor to a manager, or from a manager to the next level leader, for them to see all of the opportunities to leverage the resources they've been given. Like, for example, a lot of people don't know how to effectively delegate work. And so, they'll be when they get promoted, they're working these ridiculously long hours, and, they're dissatisfied because they're like, okay, I got the raise and I got the title, but man, I'm working twice as much as I used to. And it doesn't have to be like that. In fact, when you're given that level of responsibility, it actually could be more freeing. Even though you have more responsibilities, it could be more freeing because you actually, pull the strings on, you can envision like, okay, well, how do I want to structure things? Could I build better processes that are more efficient? Could I, re-engineer processes? Because a lot of times in organizations, like you might step into a role and you're just going to do it the same way the last person did it. And then if you really dig into some of the processes, you realize like, oh, well, this report that I've been giving to my boss every week because my predecessor did this, my boss doesn't even know why I'm sending it to them and they never read it. So, you can kind of like go back and re-examine, like, is this still needed? Could I do more with the amount of, resources that I have?
Well, there's a saying in real estate that it's harder to get from a couple of units a year to a couple hundred units a year, because all you're doing, you already have the systems in place, and now you're just tweaking the different systems instead of putting it all on your shoulders. So it definitely can make sense with as growing up the ranks. How do you, I guess, protect your client and yourself from not bringing kind of some of the, I guess, when we're told stories, right, or we're told ideas of what's happening in their work, and then we try to correlate it to our past and our corporate, and going, oh my gosh, I was taking advantage in this situation. I'm assuming that they're probably taking advantage in this situation, and you jump too fast. Is that ever the case, or how do you pull yourself back from not doing that?
That's where the coach training comes into play for sure, because one of the things that they taught us in training is don't get caught up in their story, right? Because it's not about like, how do you come up with a zippy comeback for the guy that puts you down in the meeting or whatever. It's not about that. It's really about getting curious about what's at the root of why this matters to them, right? Because that's what it's about. It's about their perception of what's going on around them. It's not like what's happening on the surface. It's really about, what are your thoughts? What are your beliefs about this, right? And if you change your belief, are you going to see this situation differently? Or are you going to see more options for how you can show up? Because the reality is that you cannot change other people. You can't. You can show up differently. And sometimes if you show up differently, they'll show up differently. And that's really what coaching is about. And, sometimes also, what's that serenity prayer? It's sort of like, understand the things you can change, understand what you can't change. I'm definitely, and have the wisdom to know the difference, right? And I've definitely worked with people where, they work in a really toxic environment. And we talk about, okay, how can you show up differently, or what can you do differently, or what options do you have? And at the end of the day, they might just realize like, no matter what I do, this is still going to be a bad situation. So maybe it's time to leave. Right. And that's okay. Right. Like I'm not a miracle worker. I'm just somebody that helps them get clarity so that they can decide on what their goals are. And together we can kind of come up with a roadmap of how to get there. We can identify skill gaps that they might have and work on that. But what's really critical is that they shift their mindset to believe that, if they've got a goal, to believe that goal is possible. Because a lot of times we'll protect ourselves by saying, well, here's all the reasons why I probably can't have that.
How long do you usually give it at a company to know if it's the right fit or not the right fit? Is there a certain time, or is it just... That's completely personal to each person, right? And sometimes people will ask me things like that, and I'm like, I'm not in a position to know, because people have different values. Some people like stability or a short commute is high on their list of what's important to them about a job. Other people, it's like they want variety, or they want unlimited ability to, earn, right? And so I can't say what one person could tolerate or what one person could enjoy, but I can help them get clarity for themselves on that. And, sometimes point out, I see a lot of times people they're putting up with a lot of BS, and sometimes they don't recognize that that's not normal.
you know.
Yeah.
And again, I don't come in and say, well, that's BS. I just say, well, it sounds like, you know, or they may be using words that, you know, sound like they feel like they're being used or manipulated. And so I might say, well, it sounds to me like you feel like you're being manipulated. Is that true? And they'll be like, oh my gosh, yeah, I had that feeling, but I couldn't put a word on it. And, you know, once they get clarity around maybe what's going on, then they start thinking, what do I want to do about this?
With building your business and putting your book together and kind of that transition, or even maybe it was before that, what do you think have been some of the bigger hurdles you've had to kind of deal with?
Well, you know, it's definitely, I would say, like, there have been a number of ones. I think that for years, you know, I was talking about this 2 or 3 years at my corporate job and not being happy. I think in the back of my mind, I think about this analogy all the time, that I felt like I was in like a skydiving plane, and that the door was open, and I kept looking out and feeling like I really want to jump. I really want to jump. But I was afraid. I was so afraid because I felt like, oh, if I jump, I'm just going to go splat on the tarmac and that'll be the end of me. So I think just taking that initial leap was scary. But I feel like I'm still up there doing, you know, somersaults and cartwheels and, you know, in the air, and I haven't even pulled the chute, right? It's fun. There's a lot of freedom once you go out on your own. It's scary, but it's fun. And you have a lot more control. But I also would say that wasn't, that was actually a gradual realization also, because I actually did leave my job. I mean, I was in a position where I could just leave my job and say, I'm going to go and do this, this training. But I still thought, okay, I'm going to like kind of detox from that job. I'm going to get this training. I'll do a little marketing consulting to make some money, and then I'll get another job. That's really what I thought at first. But when I was going through the training and I was surrounded by all these entrepreneurial minded people, I just finally said, okay, I think I can do this. I mean, I got a family. You know, at the time, my oldest son was in college, and, you know, so I think that there was a lot of fear that was holding me back in terms of like taking a full bet on myself. But, you know, you figure it out. You figure it out along the way. And I think that the hardest thing is actually just taking that first step, because there's so much. And I've said this about a lot of things in my life, but I remind my clients about it too, because I did something similar when I was in my late 20s. I was sort of unhappy with my job, and I just decided very spur of the moment to quit my job and go back to business school full time. And I didn't even know how I was going to pay for it, you know, but what I've discovered is, like, once you put your foot on the path and you start walking on that path, you'll get around the corner and you'll get a better view of how you're going to continue the journey. And I would say that that's the same thing it's been with my coaching business, right? You just got to get out there and start doing it.
So using that analogy, right? You're walking down the path, you're about to make a left, you're still kind of looking back, you know, thinking maybe you might go to the corporate world. When do you stop looking back and saying, I'm not going to the corporate world, this is the path I'm going, and I'm going full steam ahead? Do you remember that moment? Do you remember what allowed you to do that?
I don't know that. I think, again, it was sort of a gradual thing. And I will also tell you, like, I still get, you know, alerts in my email for jobs. And I'll look at them. I've sent my resume in for some of them. I'm not going to say that, you know, sometimes I haven't been like, wouldn't it be nice just to get that direct deposit, right? Because that direct deposit's nice.
Yeah.
But you know, maybe thankfully the universe is like, nah, that's not your path. But, you know, just the more that I've done it, and also I'm getting to the point now, after, you know, having been doing this for 4 years, that I'm getting repeat customers, I'm getting referrals, right? Like, when you get to a point where you're like, hey, this thing is like, it's got a life of its own, that's a good feeling, you know, that it's not like pushing that boulder up the hill that, you know, if you let off for like 1 second, it's going to roll back over you. Like, once you kind of get it going, it has a bit of a momentum of its own, and that feels really good. And I will, now look back over things that, in the beginning I did like more work on get my website set up than I was doing coaching, because I didn't have a lot of clients in the beginning. I was doing, spending time writing my book, because I didn't have, well, I remember actually the last little push to finish editing the book was like December of 2019. And, December during the holidays, typically not a like busy time for coaching, because people are like taking time off and, holiday parties and stuff like that. So I had a lot of time on my hands, not as busy as I might normally be in another month, but, spending time working on the book. And so I look back now and I'm like, okay, I planted a lot of seeds over the years, and they're blossoming now, right? And I'm very happy that I put that effort in, and it's satisfying.
Do you think, and I know it's not that long ago, but when you were in the corporate world and you were in that kind of window of time that it just wasn't fitting for you, it wasn't working out, the system, if you were talking to that person from a couple of years ago and they were your client, is there a conversation piece that you would dive deeper into, any kind of conversation you would have with them today? How would that look?
Well, I feel like I have this conversation with a lot of my clients today, and it is to remind them of how talented they are and how smart they are, and the fact that they got to where they are right now because of that, right? And I think that it can be very easy to take yourself for granted, and to, I was always on to next. And I very rarely would look over my shoulder and see how far I'd come, or how big a project I had just completed or something like that. And it's funny, because I will talk to clients about this sometimes, that how important it is to stop and celebrate your accomplishments. And when we do that, we're reminded of how strong and capable we are. And so I think that if I was going to have a conversation with myself, I mean, I knew that on a certain level, but I would have bolstered myself a lot more around that, to, just to try to build my confidence even more. I mean, obviously I was confident enough to be like, yeah, I think I can do this. Right. But there definitely were some, moments where I was scared, and I had my doubts, and I wanted to go, hide in a cave somewhere and not come out. But you got to keep going,
Do you think confidence is a big factor for a lot of people, why they stay in a rut or stay in like a bad position? Is that kind of one of the bigger reasons?
Yeah.
Or am I reading too much in that?
Well, I came across this definition of confidence, and actually I had it tacked up, when the last corporate job that I had, it was like a step up for me. And actually I'd hired a coach before that, and she really helped me to be able to position myself to be able to get that job. But I was still a little scared going in at this higher level, but I had something tacked up on my desk, which is confidence is the expectation of a positive outcome. And I think the reason why people a lot of times are not confident is because they're trying to protect themselves from disappointment. That they're saying to themselves, well, I really want this. I want to be promoted, or I want to start my own business. Oh, but, here's all the reasons why it might not work. Well, guess what? That's true. Maybe there's reasons why this might not work. But, if you get started, you can figure this out, right? I mean, I'll tell you one of the things that was scary for me in the beginning was that when I wasn't getting that, direct deposit in my account every 2 weeks, I had a lot of fear about money. And, and I thought, and by the way, I was the primary breadwinner. I have 3 kids. And when we moved here to the Chicagoland area, it was a big promotion for me. And so my kids were young, and we just decided my husband was going to stay home and be the stay-at-home parent. And then he actually did start a photography business, but it didn't make nearly as much as what I made in the corporate world. And so for me to stop, I was really fearful, like, oh my gosh, like what if I don't ramp up and if I don't replace that income, like how are we going to make it? And what I had to step back and be like, look at your freaking bank account, right? Like, okay, maybe you're not going to want to have to tap into the 401k, or you're not going to want to have to like go too deep into savings. but you're not going to end up on the street. Okay. So stop worrying about that and start putting your effort into building your business. So, I had to have those little realizations and chats with myself. And I also had to realize that, like, even if I'm using some savings to, smooth out the dips in the beginning, that it wasn't like I was never going to make money, right? Like, even if I had to 1 month pull some money out of savings, maybe the next month I'm going to get a lot of new clients, right? And it's going to even out over time. And it has. But it's just, dealing with your own fears in the beginning. We try to protect ourselves from disappointment or risk or whatever, but sometimes we have to, step back and be realistic about it and say, okay, what's the likelihood that you're, going to lose your house and you're going to be on the street? Like, it was zero. It was zero chance of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, keeping everything in perspective can play a big factor. And a lot of us we get stuck in the moment sometimes. We forget, we don't take that step back. So if we're foreshadowing, we're looking into the future. Let's say 5 years from now, where are you going to be? Where's your business going to be? What do you envision?
Well, I'm going to probably be working primarily with corporates rather than individuals. I'm already, I've aligned myself with an organization that has a whole leadership development platform that I love. That actually, when I discovered it, I was like, oh my gosh, like they had already thought through a lot of the tools and concepts that I had recognized and weren't as well articulated as what they already have. So definitely going to be scaling my business, maybe have some affiliate coaches working under me, because when you're going in and you're doing more programs with organizations, like, okay, you're doing like a training program, but then typically there's one-on-one coaching that comes out of that, and having people to support me, it's just going to help me to scale.
How does that work? I mean, you're one of the rare coaches that I've actually heard looking to grow their business with affiliated coaches and putting coaches underneath. So have you already thought of a system of training that would be there, or is each coach going to just kind of do like little sessions, little classes, but you're still going to be doing the one-on-one, or how's that going to look?
Well, I would probably use I went through a coach training program called IPEC. That was, and there's a whole alumni group coming out of that. And because I understand and I know that that's a really good quality training, I would be recruiting from people that have that background, and looking probably for people that have a similar background to mine. And having gone through the training, I know that, there were a lot of people that were in the corporate world that were looking to pivot much like I did and get into coaching. So I think looking for people that had the corporate background, who have the coach training, it would just be an interview process, much like what any, hiring for any job would be. I'd probably have them, coach me on a topic, so I got a feel for what they're like, and then, bring them on as an affiliate, so a 1099, so that if somebody didn't work out, it's not like, I have to deal with the hiring and the firing. It would just be like, okay, it's not working out, I'll get somebody else. So I think that's how I'd go about it.
Perfect. Well, if anyone's listening right now in the corporate world, or looking to, I guess, transition from the corporate world into coaching, what's the best way of them following you, reaching out to you? What's the best way, Terry?
They can reach out to me at my website. It's terrybmcdougall.com. So you can learn more about me. I've got blogs out there about how to be more successful and happier at work. I'm also very active on LinkedIn. My handle there is Terry B. McDougall. Happy to get LinkedIn with any of your listeners, and they can reach out to me through LinkedIn as well. If people are interested in my book, which is called Winning the Game of Work, it's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And then if you have an interest in marketing, that was my background, was marketing. I have a podcast, which is called Marketing Mambo, and it's on all of the platforms, or you can go to its own website, which is marketingmambo.net.
What's the Mambo aspect?
I'm a marketer. And so at first I was like, careers in marketing, blah. And I was like, I need a cool name for this, something I can really, like jump off of. And then plus once I was like, marketing mambo, I like that. Mambo is a word that in the African dialect that it comes from, it means to talk. So we're talking about marketing. And then plus, if you listen to my podcast, I've got like a really great mambo intro, and my artwork is like a takeoff on Carmen Miranda. It gave me a good creative jumping off point for the podcast.
Love it. Well, thank you again, Terry, for being on the podcast. Hopefully everyone listening got some great nuggets. I mean, I know I took away a bunch of things. I think one of the big things I took away was the idea that it's really how you look at things. I mean, it's basically your perspective on things when you're in the corporate world, and you might need to adjust your perspective before you can actually see the true value and where you're working. And maybe after that, then it might not be the right fit, but at least give yourself the time to change your perspective. Yeah.
Well, what they say, perception is reality, right? And if you can change your perception, you can change your reality.
Love it. Well, thank you guys. Please subscribe, please share, follow Terry, and on to the next one. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Vinny.